Good evening, Councillors, and welcome to this February meeting of the Council. May I remind you all of some domestic arrangements. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room opposite the stairs. Cold water is also available in the breakout area outside the meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room by following the fire exit signs. Meet on the Ipswich Town Football Training Ground pitch. Do not re-enter the building until you are told it is safe to do so. Please switch off all mobile phones or turn to silent. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you'll be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this room, you're also consenting to being filmed by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. Finally, can members and officers please ensure that you press the microphone for speaking and turn off when you finish. Can I move to the agenda now, please? Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I have received apologies from Councillor Ayres, Carpendale, Barrett, Dawson, Gould, Lindsay, Plum and Norman. Thank you.
Thank you. Declaration of interest by councillors. Are there any declarations? Thank you. Now we're going to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 21st of January 2020 for accuracy only. Are there any issues with accuracy? So can I have a proposer, please? Oh, yes, Councillor McCraw.
It's just a clarification, Chair. Point 200.1, that the final sentence read, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee should review citizens' advice funding annually. The request made by Cabinet was for Overview and Scrutiny to review the funding of citizens' advice, not the actual operation of citizens' advice, which this would imply. So I'd just like the addition of the word funding.
Thank you. That will be amended, yes? Thank you. So with that amendment, are there any other issues that we need to review? So with that amendment, could I have a proposer, please? Thank you. And can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Horan, thank you. Can we take a vote, please? Thank you, that's carried. BC 1933.
Councillor Mowbray's indicated.
Oh, Councillor Mowbray.
No, I'll repeat. Could you record that I have not voted on the minutes? I was absent, and it does include something that I couldn't speak on anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, that will be noted. So now BC 1933, announcements from the Chairman and Leader. I refer you to paper BC 1933 for noting. Thank you. Councillor Ward, do you have anything to report?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just a few little things. Firstly, following recent commentary in the media, I just thought I'd clarify a couple of things regarding the subject of bypasses. Firstly, although the business case for the Sudbury bypass is not at present sound due to new ways of calculating the costs and benefits, Babergh is still supportive of the project, and we hope it will be revived in the future, which is why it remains one of the goals in our new corporate plan. Conversely, whilst the business case for the Ipswich Northern route is very strong, I regrettably accept that it would be impossible to deliver the significant additional housing needed to pay for the road. Mid and East Suffolk are already committed to meeting the government's current housing targets in their new local plans and are unable to add any more. Suffolk County Council's Cabinet has now formally brought the project to an end. However, as I have said in the press, this is a setback for Ipswich and the whole county, and I am sure that it will have to be revisited at some point in the future, hopefully sooner rather than later. You'll have heard that last month's What Next for Sudbury exhibition and consultation event was very well attended, and we had 569 completed questionnaires. We are now working our way through all the feedback we've received, and we will be discussing what people have told us with interested parties and partners first, before sharing anything more widely. And finally, another plea to sign up to the mandatory equality and diversity training, please. Just under half of members from Babergh and Mid Suffolk have attended so far, and we do all need to do this, so please sign up. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Now item 5, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with council procedure rules.
Thank you, Chair. None received.
Item 6, questions by the public in accordance with council procedure rules. We have received a question from Mr. Marshall. Unfortunately, he is not able to be here this evening, so I will read out his question and then ask Councillor Ward to respond. This is the question from Mr. Marshall, which I shall read out verbatim. In a recent Babergh Cabinet meeting, which was broadcast on YouTube, it was advised that the proposed terms to a lease with a hotel operator for the Bellevue site in Sudbury were being changed from 25 years to 24 years. The Chief Executive did also propose that the terms could be changed to 24 years and 364 days. Please can you confirm that the change to the proposed lease terms has not been done to circumnavigate any of the asset of community value implications under the Localism Act 2011, which would be a consideration if the base term were 25 years and not if close to circumnavigate. What was the reason for the change? Councillor Ward, can you respond, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Bellevue House and the former swimming pool site have been listed as an asset of community value since the 31st of March 2015. The District Council gave notice on an intention to dispose of this site originally in 2015. A community bid was received in 2015, but was unsuccessful when assessed against the other bids received. And this did contribute towards the delay in bringing this site forward with the selected party, a hotel operator. The 18-month protected period was triggered again in November 2019, primarily due to the request for expressions of interest in Bellevue House and the unknown nature as to whether that interest will be on a freehold or leasehold basis. Whilst the protection is in place against disposal of both the house and the swimming pool site, a lease of either building for less than 25 years would not constitute disposal as defined by the Localism Act 2011. Therefore, should the Council wish to proceed with a lease to the hotel operator, we would be able to do so on a lease of less than 25 years. A final decision on this has yet to be made. Also, the design of the hotel scheme has been an iterative process and several changes have been made, including changing it from 2 separate buildings to a single stacked building to reduce the land needed for the scheme. The hotel scheme has been consulted on recently in the What Next for Sudbury event. These responses are currently being analysed and a final review of the whole scheme will be required before an agreement for lease is entered into or a planning application is submitted. This project is good for Sudbury and the whole district, and it has a lot of support, which is why the Cabinet voted for it and full Council approved its financing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. I'll ensure Mr Marshall gets your response in writing. Item 7. Questions by councillors in accordance with council procedure rules.
Thank you, Chair. None received.
Thank you. Item 8. BC 1934. Overview and Scrutiny Committee Report. I would like to invite Councillor McCraw to introduce his report, which is for noting. Councillor McCraw.
Thank you, Chair. You have before you, admittedly, a somewhat lengthy report from Overview and Scrutiny covering the 3 meetings held in January. It was a busy month. We had to catch up on some meetings that had been postponed due to events at the end of last year. I won't go through the details, except to say that the first of these dealt with the corporate plan outputs. You can see our resolution was focused particularly on the point that the Cabinet should be urged to find a range of methods to engage with all members to understand the linkage between the corporate plan, the wheel, and these corporate outputs, and explain where member working groups fitted into that role. The second meeting held later the same day was an annual statutory requirement to scrutinise the Western Suffolk Community Safety Partnership. This was given its usual thorough examination. At the end of it, we concluded that despite the fact that the work was still continuing, not a great deal had changed since our previous year's report, but we wanted to update the confidential member toolkit to provide members with a set of useful and confidential phone numbers that they might be able to use within their own wards. The third meeting was held to look at the general draft budget that we are looking at now and the 4-year outlook, and also the draft revenue housing account. That was a draft. Now you have the actual budget before you. Looking at it, it seems very little changed from those draft reports, so you can see the various items we raised during our examination. We endorsed the recommendations that were contained within the report, and they will be similar to those you have before you today. I'd only like to add that we noted with satisfaction both the format in which the reports to us were presented. We felt them to be an improvement on previous years, much more easily understood, and also noted with satisfaction the new build of 229 homes, because that is something that gives us a great deal of satisfaction. And finally, all I'd like to do is thank the members of the committee, particularly for the concentrated period of effort that they put in during January. There were some of us who felt like we spent most of the month in the Endeavour House. I think Councillor Adrian Osborne in particular, with all his various many tasks involved. So I'd like to thank them and the officers for getting all that report information to us. Happy to take any questions on the content of the report, either during this meeting or afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Are there any questions by councillors? Councillor Beer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, just a question to you. The list of phone numbers, confidential and what have you, will they be forthcoming to all members? Because that sounds a very good idea. I think it's long overdue, because if we have emergencies in our areas or things happen that we need to get some advice very, very quickly, it's very difficult if you've got to try and find out who you can speak to. So I'm very pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Councillor McCraw.
Yep, the contact toolkit for councillors was issued last year, in October 2018, and has been available at any time. If you need a copy of the current one, I'm more than happy to forward that to. Yes, it's intended to be for all members, but it is specified that some of these numbers are confidential, because they are not for general use, because they will be we are dealing after all with a series of safeguarding issues, and their confidentiality must be crucial. Just waiting for the update, but it will be forthcoming.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Any further questions? Thank you. We'll move on to our next item then. Item 9, BC 1935, General Fund Budget 2020-21 and 4-year outlook. I would like to invite Councillor Ward to introduce the paper and to move the recommendations in the report.
I'm pleased to introduce report BC 1935 for the 2020 to 2021 General Fund Budget and 4-year outlook. The report contains details of the revenue and capital budgets and the Council's strategic financial aim. It will enable us today to consider key aspects of the budget and improve the report. It will also enable us to consider the medium-term financial position and ensure it is sustainable. The Government has confirmed that the Fair Funding Review, Business Rates Review and Business Rates Reset have been deferred by 12 months to 2021 to 22. However, the financial settlement for this coming year does give us additional funding of £265,000, and details of this are provided in paragraph 4.14 of the report. We have a sound financial strategy that responds effectively to the changing funding landscape for local government. The strategic aims, principles and approach are set out in section 6 of the report. In summary, we must continue with our efforts to become self-sufficient through maximising our income streams, continue to make efficiencies and productivity savings, and continue to find new ways of working. The General Fund budget setting is just part of producing a medium-term outlook for our finances, which is both sensible and sustainable. That's why during the lengthy process, we spend a considerable amount of time working on projecting the 4-year outlook. And details of the funding, pressures and savings and income for the next 4 years are provided in paragraphs 8.2 to 8.18. Core to our funding is the need to have a strong council tax base. And so, from the perspective of the 4-year outlook, the numbers produce a compelling case for the need for council tax increases each year. For 2020 to 2021, we will do this at the maximum level allowed without requiring a referendum, i.e. £5 per year, or 3.1% for an average Band E property, reducing to 2% per annum thereafter. Along with the most welcome 2.51% growth in the Band E equivalent number of properties for 2020 to 2021, and 1.5% per annum thereafter, this will ensure that we can grow our council tax revenues to help offset the ongoing cost pressures that we face. Together, these will provide £308,000 of additional income for 2020 to 2021. And the full council tax details can be found in Appendix C of your report. Now, the amended document that you've been given this evening is an update to Appendix C and is a result of a late precept change for Stansted. It has only amended the numbers very slightly. We will also be raising long-term parking charges for the first time since 2012 from £2 to £3 for each 24-hour period after the first 3 hours free. Since 2011 to 2012, the Council has achieved cumulative savings in income of £17.4 million through shared services, efficiencies, better use of technology and maximising commercial opportunities, vindicating the bold decisions that have been made in that period. Further savings in income of £2.6 million have already been identified for next year and beyond. The details of these are provided in paragraph 8.18. The General Fund budget requires £344,000 of the 2020 to 2021 New Homes bonus receipts, £1.6 million of Section 31 grants, £227,000 of the Rural Services Delivery Grant, and £278,000 from our earmarked reserves to achieve a balanced budget. It should be noted that the £278,000 from the reserves is less than half the amount we transferred last year. The good news is that only 33% of the anticipated New Homes bonus will be required, which will enable us to transfer the surplus £711,000 to the Transformation Fund. Details of New Homes bonus funding are provided in paragraphs 8.6 to 8.10 of the report. Over the next 3 years, the Council will need to use 100% of the New Homes bonus and 100% of the Section 31 grant, totalling £4.8 million, and will still have a budget gap of £1.1 million at the end of that period. This is described in paragraphs 8.19 to 8.23, and significant income or savings, or both, will be needed to address this. Appendix A shows a breakdown of the Council's net cost of service for this year, which is £10.196 million, and next year, which is reduced to £9.969 million. This is a decrease of £227,000 or 2.2%. The funding is shown in both Table 10 and Appendix A. The full budget book for 2020 to 2021 is provided in Appendix D, and the proposed fees and charges schedule is provided in Appendix E. The reserves levels are detailed in paragraph 7.5, Table 3. And whilst we had to use a large amount for the 2019 to 2020 budget, thanks to the New Homes bonus contribution, the level at the end of March 2021 is expected to improve, with the Transformation Fund a much healthy £994,000. Even with this improvement, the level of reserves, excluding SIL, drops by 6% over the 2 years from March 2019 to March 2021, and so this does require close attention in the future. The capital programme is set out in Appendix B, and the planned spend for 2020 to 2021 is £11.4 million. The main areas are just under £1 million on housing grants, £8.7 million investment in SIFCO, and just under £1 million on the continuation of the refurbishment of the 2 leisure centres. The 3 major differences from this time last year are that we're not expecting to complete the further SIFCO investment until 2021 to 2022 now. The Bellevue capital investment has been delayed again until 2021 to 2022, and we have yet to dip into the Strategic Land and Property Investment Fund. The Capital and Investment Strategy, which you'll hear about later, has further details of the Council's borrowing capacity and the impacts of the capital programme. We will be making changes to the empty property discount. The background to this is explained in paragraphs 11.1 to 11.7. We will keep the level of discount for unoccupied and unfurnished properties at 25%, but reduce the period from 3 months to 28 days, after which full council tax is payable. The uninhabitable discount will remain unchanged at 25% for 12 months. If this had been in place in 2018, we would have raised a further £53,000 in council tax. Finally, the pay policy statement is provided in Section 12. This is something we're required to do for each financial year under Section 38(1) of the Localism Act 2011. I'd like to propose the recommendations in paragraphs 3.1 to 3.5. Now, I am conscious that most members will already have had a chance to review the budget in the very helpful briefings in order to facilitate our understanding of the key elements. And some of you, members of the Cabinet and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, will have had a chance to review it more than once. So I hope you still have some questions and comments. And to assist me in any questions, as usual, I have the excellent finance team here, who are to be congratulated on their work on this year's budget. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Arthey. Now we'll open it up to questions and debate. Would anyone like to ask any questions? Councillor Maybury.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And first of all, to confirm, I removed myself during the last item as I should not be in the room because I am a director of a citizen's advice. So that's why I removed myself. My first question, I have several, so I'll go up and down. My first is, could Councillor Ward confirm that he said the total surplus transferred to reserves would be 711,000? Because I thought he said 738.
711 is the surplus from the New Homes bonus that will be transferred to the Transformation Fund reserve. 711.
Councillor Maybury, did you have another?
Oh, yes, thank you, Chairman. I have several. Right, page 47, 11.8, which is reducing discount period from 3 months to 28 days. Yes, absolutely fine. The second half of that paragraph talks about continuing a discount for 12 months because it's uninhabitable. I would suggest if this was reduced, we could actually bring more homes into use.
Councillor Ward?
That is the aim of reducing the unfurnished and empty property discount to 28 days. The uninhabitable discount is remaining at 12 months simply because it's recognition of the time it takes to get most properties back into habitable use. They may need a significant amount of work doing on them, so that's why we've left that at 12 months.
Councillor Maybury?
Yes, I'm going to return on that because I believe the rulings are if you don't have a bed and you don't have water, then it's classed as uninhabitable. My suggestion is that some of these items may possibly be done so that a property can be kept unfurnished and uninhabitable. So I would have urged a shorter period. The second, if I may, page 47 again, 11.10 at the bottom. I don't quite understand that. Does this mean that if a dwelling has been unoccupied and unfurnished, but then somebody uses it for 6 weeks, they can then apply again for it to be classed as unfurnished? I didn't quite understand that. Thank you.
Yes, it does mean that if there's any interim occupancy period, if it lasts for less than 6 weeks, then it's wrapped up into the unoccupied and unfurnished period, but 6 weeks or more, then that resets.
So that actually means that that would encourage people to use the property. Thank you. Page 51. Gender pay gap under 12.21, which also runs into page 53 in my understanding. Because we cannot describe any gender pay gap, I cannot see how we can actually say that there is no equality, bias. So I would disagree with that. And I do apologise for my cold, but I caught this from a child on public transport. But if you could just explain why gender pay gap does not affect equality. Thank you.
Chief Executive will now talk.
I'll give an answer, but I'm not sure it's the answer to the question because I'm not sure I understand the question. So I'll give you the answer that I can give. So that section talks about the gender pay gap as set out by the legislation. We're required to report on it. The point that the report is making is technically we are required to report for Babergh and separately, in my case, for Mid Suffolk. Of course, you will know because you have a joint workforce that creates a nonsense. And so in reality, when looking at gender equality and the pay gap, the meaningful way of looking at it is to look at the total workforce and look at the combined totals, because that is your workforce. It's not just those who are technically employed by Babergh and just those who are technically employed by Mid Suffolk. The only way to get a true feel for it is to look at the combined data. But I don't think that answers the question, as I said.
Would you like to clarify?
Yes, I will. Because we do not have details of the gender pay gap, because it actually says that, and it will be published later, that means that there could possibly be a claim on equality, and that is what I'm querying. So I believe that this is not correct, as in there is no equality bias. Thank you.
Okay, so the whole purpose of the gender pay gap is to establish whether or not we have any issues in relation to equality, absolutely. In terms of claims in relation to equality, that would have to be in relation to any distinction, so making a comparison potentially as a man, am I being discriminated against as opposed to how the council treats a fair comparator, not any other woman, but somebody on equal pay for equal work status. So there isn't quite the same logic, if you like, between our connection between a potential equal pay claim in relation to equality and the wider gender pay gap. You may still have a gender pay gap, but without having an equality issue in terms of equality of pay, but you still have an equality issue in terms of the broader sense of the word. The other element for us is, and the aspiration, certainly as Chief Executive, is to make sure that we are narrowing that gender pay gap wherever we can. But we look at that every year, not just because we're obliged to do so, but because we want to do so, to look at what do our statistics tell us and what can we do to try and narrow that gap. Of course, as you look across the organisation, that will vary depending upon the services that we're providing. Because if you take something like waste collection, we do not directly employ our waste collection staff. If we did directly employ our waste collection staff, they tend to be, and I hope I'm not stereotyping, but they tend to be males. And that has an impact on your overall gender equality and your gender pay gap as a result, because you have a chunk of men being employed at a certain rate when looked at compared to your staffing overall. So it needs to be read in the round. It's very difficult, it's not quite your question again, but it's very difficult to necessarily compare us with another council, because although we all provide the same statutory functions, how we go about doing that will vary from council to council, depending on whether you have a direct workforce or whether you have an indirect workforce because it's been outsourced. So again, if you look at something like public realm, our public realm is not directly delivered by us, it's delivered under contract. So those staff don't count towards our numbers, but are still relevant, obviously, in terms of what are we doing overall. I think it's probably easier to try and explain it outside of the meeting and with the gender pay report. That will give you a much richer picture.
I'll come back on that. I shall certainly look forward to that. It's really interesting what your comment about waste collectors. Mine are excellent in my area. They are the best thing ever. And I hope somebody will take that back to the staff. It would be really good, as I've seen in other areas, to have some female waste collectors, because I'm sure they would be really, really good.
Thank you, Councillor Maybury. Any further questions? Councillor Hinton, thank you.
Hit the button. Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question is concerning the perennial problem, as I see it, with our budget and our accounts and everything else, and that is this mysterious body called the Transformation Fund, which was supposedly to transform us from being one council workforce into two council workforces, and still seems to go on. And yet we've got in, if we look at the papers, on page 37, it shows a transfer to reserves of 711,000, and some transfer from nowhere. Some money's going out, but it doesn't say where they're going to. So we have this mysterious pot of money that is being added to the whole time, but with no real identity as to what it's actually used for. And it just rather implies that it's a little bit like the answer to the member of the public, which didn't actually answer the question as to whether or not the change of a lease was to get round the community asset order. If we've got money in the Transformation Fund, we can do things with it without actually asking council whether it's all right for us to do it. So I would like to know, where is the Transformation Fund, how much is in it, and what it is used for, because it doesn't seem to appear in any of these figures here.
Councillor Ward, is that a question for you?
I'll try, but I'll pass over if I need to. The Transformation Fund is, as it says on the tin, it's for transforming. And you quite rightly pointed out one of the original purposes. But transformation is an ongoing process. It's not something that's going to be done and then finished. We have to keep transforming to remain nimble and fit for purpose, and fit for the future. And the Chief Executive has already identified a number of other activities that we do need to do. And so we have transferred the £711,000, as I said, from the New Homes Bonus surplus to the Transformation Fund reserve. Now, in addition, you will be aware that we have a climate change task force that is working on identifying measures to make us carbon neutral by 2030. This is going to require funding, and so the Transformation Fund will be a source of funding for the climate change mitigation activities, which we will inevitably have to do over the next few years. But I don't know, if Catherine, is there anything else you would like to add to that?
I can just add some clarity in terms of the 22,000 that's planned to go out of the fund in 2020-21. That is around the town visioning work. So we're using the Transformation Fund to help with that visioning work. Also, just in terms of transparency around the Transformation Fund, when we're doing the budget monitoring reports to Cabinet on a quarterly basis, there is an appendix always in that report that shows how we're spending, and there is a table as well that sets out all the money going in and out, so you get a regular update on the balances of the Transformation Fund. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hardacre, I think you had a question.
I'm glad that Councillor Ward mentioned the Environmental Task Force. There's only one sentence in this entire budget that mentions the environment, and it says words to the effect that managers will consider the environmental impact of any savings proposals. I'm curious why we're not considering the environmental impact of spending.
Councillor Ward? Or
Which spending in particular? And could you provide some clarification, please?
It's interesting that the single sentence, 19.1 at the bottom of page 53, just says, managers will consider the environmental impact of any savings proposals throughout the year. But there's no other mention of the environment in this, and no mention of how the environment will be considered when spending money, only when considering saving proposals. Maybe it's just a wording issue, but it's unfortunate there's only a single sentence on the environment.
I guess it probably could be worded a bit clearer, but as part of our environmental assessment of any paper or any proposal that we consider, obviously we'll be looking at the environmental impacts of whatever we do, whether it's measures we take to save money or things we have to spend money on. So I think you can be rest assured, Councillor Hardacre, that the environment is something that we are increasingly putting as a key factor in decision making at this council. And as I said earlier, the Climate Change Task Force will be advising on specific environmental activities that we're going to have to take to mitigate the impacts of climate change and meet our carbon neutral aspirations.
Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If I can just come back on what Councillor Ward says. What we're proposing to do on climate change and other aspects in the future surely should be budget items and not just something that disappears into a mysterious pot called the Transformation Fund. We're talking here on page 87 of an estimated balance on the 31st of March of 306,000, use of reserves. Now, what reserves are those? Are those reserves of the council or are they part of the Transformation Fund, 22,000? And transfer to reserves, is that reserves of the council or is it the Transformation Fund, 711,000? We have all these different terms being used which rather hide the fact that there's a great big pot of money slopping about the place that nobody seems to have any control over except Cabinet. And as I remember, when we first introduced the concept of Cabinet to this council, we gave them a £50,000 limit on what they could actually authorise. So where is the money, what's it going to be used for, and when are we actually going to be told what it's going to be used for so that we can approve it beforehand if necessary?
Councillor Ward.
Yeah. The point about a reserve is, unless it's a specific earmarked reserve, it's there for uses that will be identified in the future. At the moment, until we've had the report back from the Climate Change Task Force, we don't have specific items, specific projects that we will need to spend that money on. Councillor Malvisi, I don't know if you've got an update on the Climate Change Task Force and where we are with that. Perhaps it might be quite useful to provide a summary to Councillor Hinton. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ward and Madam Chairman and Councillor Hinton. Climate change encompasses a multitude of issues. It's not just a case of planting trees, it's not just a case of having electric charging points. And the task force is currently working in collating all the information. We've been held up because we've tasked Groundworks to produce some data, and the data gathering has been problematical for them, and they should be delivering to us later in March, by which time at the end of March we're putting together the actual report for Council, and we should be delivering to Council sometime in April. Then is when we can tell you how much things will cost. But until then, we can't, because how long is a piece of string?
Thank you, Councillor Malvesi. Councillor Hinton, did you want to say?
Yeah, on that point, what is Groundworks' expertise and what data are they actually collecting and what's it actually going to tell us?
Councillor Malvesi.
Sorry, if I could just finish up with one thing it probably won't tell us is the fact that East Anglia has been slowly dipping into the sea since the last ice age, which I'm sure it won't be mentioned.
Councillor Malvesi.
Trouble is, I'm having a senior moment here. And I don't know how to trace the email on my laptop to be able to tell you, but Groundworks, I worked with Groundworks 20 years ago up in Manchester to implement the waste oil regulations when they were brought in around about 97. They do environmental impact assessments across the country, and they will be bringing to us, to the workforce, information and data on carbon reduction.
Thank you, Councillor Malvesi. May I draw everyone back now to the paper that we're meant to be discussing? Has any other councillor got anything they'd like to ask regarding this paper? Councillor Hurren.
Yes, just a quick one, Chairman. Thank you. Something was touched on before, 11.7, page 47. It says the council is liable to pay council tax on their own unfurnished, unfinished properties. I just wonder, is there an audit trail to do that? I would ask that now, wouldn't I? Or is this just tallied up at the end of the financial year and we do swapsies? Just however does that work? We pay ourselves, in other words, I would presume, or it transferred from one part of Babergh to another. And I'm just interested to know how that is actually done. And also, how sharp are we on billing housing associations for unfurnished, unfinished properties, empty properties, in other words?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't have the answers to your questions, Councillor Hurren, at the moment. So if you'll bear with me, I'll find out. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Councillor Busby, I believe you had a question.
I've only read this thing about 4 times, so excuse me if I've missed something. But if you look on page 135, Appendix B of the Joint Investment Strategy, if we look at the Bellevue-Sudbury line, sounds like a railway, forecast at the end of this year's 230,000, then it jumps to 2.75 million, then it jumps to 6.53 million, implying that there's an expenditure of about 2.5 million in 1 year and 3.8 million in the next, which is fine. If we go back to page 86...
Councillor, can I just ask you, are you still on paper,
Yes.
the general fund budget paper?
Yes, because that's page 86. If you go back to page 86, which then shows investment and commercial delivery Bellevue capital programme for the next 4 years, it's got the 2.5 million in. It doesn't seem to have the 3.8 million in for the next year. Somebody explain that?
Catherine, are you going to take this one? Oh, Councillor Ward?
That looks like an error in Appendix B. Unless
I
Catherine,
think Catherine's still...
Yeah.
I think I can assist. It's in the column that's being brought forward from the current financial year. So it's in the first left-hand column, in column B, the 3.8 million. So it's already in the approved capital programme, but it will be moved forward from the current year into the year that it's needed. So it will be carried forward into 2021.
Have you further question on that, Councillor Busby?
Only that I didn't understand the answer, and I don't believe the answer's quite correct. I can't see where the 3.8 million expenditure is. It comes in, according to the schedule that we've got in the Joint Investment Strategy, it comes in after we spend the 2.5 million, not before it. So I can't understand where the 3.8 million appears in the general fund budget book.
Officers, are you able to give some further clarification, please?
Yep, I think there is an error in the budget book. If I can refer you to page 56, there is an extra column in there. So I think in that table you have got the 3.8 million shown as being brought forward. So you've got the 6.6 million there in total. So yeah, acknowledge there is an error in that budget book page, but we'll update that before we publish it online.
Does that now make it clear?
Well, it's just the order that you've put them in. On page 135, Appendix B of the Joint Investment Strategy, it clearly shows that the expenditure will be 2.5 million first and then 3.8 million next. How, according to your figures, do we seem to be bringing forward the 3.8 million expenditure? Are you reversing the way that we're planning on funding it or financing it?
I think the Capital and Investment Strategy appendix is how we now expect the profiling to work. What you're seeing in the budget report is that some of that money is already in an approved capital programme, so it's there already and we will need to move it forward into the years that it needs to happen. But so the Capital Investment Strategy is how we're currently thinking that the payments will profile. So there's just a slight difference between what's already been approved and how we think we will actually spend it and the time when we will spend it.
Happy? Thank you. Any further questions on this paper? I see no further questions.
Sorry.
Oh, Councillor Busby.
Can we take the recommendations separately, please? 3.1 to 3.5 rather than en masse?
We have to take a recorded vote, and if we do it that way, we'll have to take a recorded vote on each item separately. Is that acceptable? Our monitoring officer wishes to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. The Council could decide to take each one individually. However, there does need to be a recorded vote by roll call for each of those sections of the recommendation, because remember that it is a whole recommendation just divided into sections. If there was a particular element that members would like to draw out, I would suggest that that might be a way forward rather than taking each one individually. But of course, the will of the Council will be adhered to.
Councillor McCraw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In looking at a budget, it strikes me that it either all hangs together or it all doesn't hang together. And I believe it does hang together. I don't think you can start cherry-picking individual recommendations of the totality of the budget. Here it is, it's a budget. If there is an aspect of it that somebody finds they cannot agree with, they have the simple option, which is, of course, to vote against that budget. Personally, as I say, having scrutinised it and closely, and having, as has been pointed out, seen the draft budget figures many times, and yes, I can see where there are issues with the interpretation of figures. I mean, looking at the joint investment strategy and comparing it to figures in the budget, frankly, doesn't seem to me to be entirely fair, since the documents serve different purposes. But effectively, we're looking at the budget, the general fund budget, and that's it. One go, one vote.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Councillor Busby.
In that case, why have we got 5 separate recommendations if it's one budget? Look, I'll put it straight. 3.2, I cannot vote for it, but I won't vote against it. I want to abstain, and I want it recorded that I abstain.
So you would wish to abstain from the whole process?
3.2.
That will come out when we do the recording vote. So that's fine.
So we're going to take the vote en bloc. In accordance with Council Procedure Rule 19.3, immediately after any vote is taken at a budget decision meeting of the Council, the names of the councillors who cast a vote for the decision or against the decision or who abstained from voting shall be recorded in the minutes of that meeting. And I ask Jan Robinson to conduct this. We will take a recorded vote for and against and any abstentions.
Are we taking 3.1 to 3.5 as one decision? So we're not allowed
Yes.
to sort of pick and choose
No,
and
we're
decide
doing it
which
as a
bits we
block.
want, think are right and which bits we don't think are right.
Correct.
So in other words, we've got to say no to all of it rather than to one bit of it.
That's correct.
Doesn't seem very democratic, but still.
Thank you, Chair. I should call out your name, and if you could answer for, against or abstain. Thank you. Councillor Arthey. For. Councillor Beer. Against. Councillor Busby. Abstain. Councillor Creswell. Abstain. Councillor Davis. For. Councillor Fraser. For. Councillor Granger Howard. For. Councillor Grandon.
For.
Councillor Hardacre. For. Councillor Hinton.
Abstain.
Councillor Holt.
For.
Councillor Hurren.
For.
Councillor Jameson.
For.
Councillor Malvesi.
For.
Councillor Maybury.
Abstain.
Councillor McCraw.
For.
Councillor McCarran. Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Nunn.
Abstain.
Councillor Adrian Osborne.
For.
Councillor Jan Osborne.
For.
Councillor Owen.
Abstain.
Councillor Parker.
For.
Councillor Ward.
For.
Yeah, that's fine. So that's carried.
The vote is carried for. We'll now move on to item 10, BC 1936, Housing Revenue Account, Budget 2020-21 and Longer Term Outlook. I would like to invite Councillor Ward to introduce paper BC 1936 and to move the recommendations in the report.
I'm pleased to introduce report BC 1936 for the 2020 to 2021 Housing Revenue Account Budget and Long-Term Outlook. It covers both the HRA Revenue Account and the Capital Programme. We have a sound 30-year business plan which has resulted in favourable positions for both revenue and capital for 2020 to 2021. We have been helped by the ending of the annual 1% rent reduction imposed by the Welfare Reform and Work Act 2016. The Act now allows rents to be increased by CPI, which is currently 1.7%, plus 1% for 5 years from 2020 to 2021. The remaining 25 years of the business plan are based on an annual rent increase of CPI only. The full 30-year business plan is attached to Appendix B. A fundamental review of the housing service has been undertaken during 2019 to 2020 to identify savings, efficiencies and income generation opportunities to achieve a sustainable business plan into the future. And the scope of this review is provided in section 7.1 of the report. We are continuing with our aspiration to increase our housing stock. New homes of all types provide us with new homes bonus and council tax, but additional council housing also delivers rental income and wider financial and social benefits. The table in section 10.1 of the report sets out the HRA budget for 2020 to 21, based on a 2.7% rent increase, and highlights the movement from the past year's budget. A surplus position of £334,000 is forecast, which is a significant improvement on the 2019 to 2020 position, which was a deficit of £193,000. This has been achieved by reducing both revenue and capital budgets, as you can see in table 10.1, and we are proposing to transfer this surplus to the HRA reserves. Key adverse movements highlighted in the budget are a reduction in income of £187,000, primarily due to 2020 to 2021 being a 52-week year, whereas last year was 53 weeks, and also there have been delays in new builds. There's an increase of £189,000 in general management costs due to staff costs and the transfer of the ICT budget to the HRA. There's also been a small increase in repairs and maintenance and also for property services. Set against these favourable variances, most notably a reduction in the revenue contribution to capital of £1.047 million due to the revised capital programme. In addition to the rent increase, we are proposing to increase sheltered housing charges by £2 per week to ensure recovery of the actual cost. It is proposed that utility charges are kept at the same level as the current year. Garage rents will remain at the current level, and we will continue to look for alternative uses for unviable garage sites. We continue to look for income and savings opportunities, and next year we'll see a focus on all contracts more than £50,000 to review the terms of each of these and to identify savings opportunities, as well as the decision on the long-term future of building services via joint venture with Flagship Housing. A review of the HRA business plan will also be undertaken. Income increases or savings continue to be reflected in the budget and will be monitored during the year. And finally, I'd like to note that right-to-buy sales were lower than those projected in the business plan. In 2018 to 2019, Babergh sold 15 properties against an original projection of 27 sales. The reinvestment limit of 30% of right-to-buy sales income will be an increasing problem as our building and acquisitions programme progresses. Babergh and Mid-Suffolk responded to the government's recent consultation on right-to-buy. A detailed breakdown of all the HRA earmarked reserves, both revenue and capital forecast, as at the 31st of March 2021, can be found in Appendix C and shows an improvement over the year of nearly £1.9 million. Paragraph 6.2 of the report shows the predicted movement in revenue reserves over the next 30 years, and it shows a slight reduction from £12.9 to £12.6 million. And paragraph 6.3 shows the debt repayment profile for the next 30 years, with all debt being repaid by 2049 to 2050. Paragraphs 11.1 to 11.4 summarise the capital investment programme for the next 4 years, and Appendix A provides more detail. Section 6.4 gives a graphical view of the expenditure, and working with Iceni to identify development sites, we are aiming to build a further 156 affordable homes and 23 for shared ownership over the period 2020 to 2023. We are anticipating a cumulative capital programme budget of just under £51.2 million, which includes £26.9 million for the new builds and acquisitions, to be financed from a number of sources as shown in paragraph 11.2 and the appendix, including £11.7 million of borrowing. No strategic priority reserves will be used to finance this programme. I'd like to propose the recommendations in paragraph 3.1 to 3.9 of your report. And to assist me in any questions, I do have the finance team and also Gavin Fisk here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Osborne. Thank you. We'll open it now up to questions and debate. Would anyone like to? Councillor Beer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just through you to the leader and the cabinet member for housing. Can I be assured that you will ask your team to look at the possibility of the garages that are not being used or possibly becoming derelict, whether they could be usefully used by demolishing them if necessary, and those spaces be made available for parking in some of our hard-pressed areas on our estates. Thank you.
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, there's a review of garages currently being undertaken, and in that report it clearly states that we'll be looking at other options apart from the possibility of housing, but also to create additional parking spaces as well. We need to bear in mind that some of these garage sites are mixed tenure, so we need to bear that in mind. But no, that is one option that's being looking at, Councillor Bear.
Thank you. Councillor Maybury.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can I just ask if the £2 per week increase for sheltered housing service, is that in addition to the increase in rent, please?
Councillor Ward.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Can I just ask also why the garage rents are not being increased? Because in my opinion, those who are really vulnerable and require sheltered accommodation seem to be paying more, and I understand that there has been a subsidy, are being charged a lot more, where some of that could have been offset with the rent of garages.
Well, there are a couple of points there. The sheltered housing increase is to offset the actual costs, which have been increasing for the sheltered housing service. But in terms of the garage rents, many of our garages are actually tied to council house tenancies anyway and are not let separately. But with the vacancies we have in garages, we do realise that we do need to provide some form of incentive to take up garage rents. And so consequently, we felt that it wouldn't have been prudent to increase the rents at this stage. And in any event, the potential increase in income would be very limited from doing that.
Thank you. In my opinion, garages are usually used for storage, and I would have said that increasing the garage rents would have helped. I understand that some of these garage blocks, some of them are empty, some of them are used, and I'm going to say mainly for storage. And if there was an increase, perhaps that would have freed those up so the sites could possibly have been used for more housing.
Councillor Ward. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. That's the whole reason we're doing an evaluation of all our garage sites to establish that.
It's quite interesting that Councillor Osborne is answering when Councillor Ward has actually put this paper forward, because it's always been Councillor Osborne in the past, and so we seem to be having two people answer. Thank you.
If you cast your mind back to last year, I did present the HRA budget as well as the general fund budget. Councillor Osborne is answering the questions that are specifically relating to the housing service because she's a cabinet member for housing. If you had a financial question on the HRA budget, I would answer it.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Hardacre.
I noticed on page 102 in the debt overview chart, it says it shows different types of debt held by the HRA over the next 30 years. However, this is based on a reduced level of new build and acquisitions after the first 2 years. And because that chart goes up to what appears to be this green ceiling, does that mean that we're effectively binding future ourselves in the future if we chose that we did actually want to build more?
Councillor Ward.
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of that?
So I was just asking if it says here that it's assuming that we're going to reduce the amount of new builds after the first 2 years, and then the debt goes up to this line. Does that mean that we will be unable to build any more if we want to? Because I think we should be building more.
Gavin, can you pick up on that?
Thank you, Chair. Just to answer the question, in relation to the green line, it's a prudential borrowing limit that we set following the removal of the former debt cap. That line can shift subject to the ambition of the council to build more houses. The programme is based on the current programme in the next 2 to 3 years in terms of delivery of new homes. But yes, I'd expect that table over the 30-year life of the HRA to continue to shift in terms of new debt, new borrowing to support new housing delivered in the district.
Councillor McCraw.
I just wonder if it's worth at this point bringing up the fact that Scrutiny asked a specific question on the intention of building new housing. I referred earlier to the 229 houses proposed in the current programme, and we specifically asked if that was going to be the end of it, was there an intention of continuing such a programme of new building? And the answer received was yes, there was just that intention. But obviously we can't tell what will happen in the future. But yes, this is definitely something that we were told would be going forward. And I think that might answer Councillor Hardacre's intentions.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Any further questions? Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 106, it talks about the capital investment programme for the HRA and talks about new build and acquisitions 26.9 million. And then a bit further down, as Councillor Ward mentioned, talking about building 156 affordable homes and 23 shared ownership homes. Nowhere in any of these charts does it show where the income from right to buy has actually gone. And what is the figure for this current year that we have built into the business plan for right to buy losses, if you like, to the housing stock?
Councillor Ward, are you wishing to answer this question?
No, I can't find it at the moment, Chair.
Gavin, are you able to answer this, please?
Thank you, Chair. If I can, if I've interpreted the question correctly, table on 11.2 does explain the level of right to buy receipts in terms of financing. The number of right to buys has been declining over recent years, and we will continually revise the HRA business plan according to those projections. It's very prudent to ensure that we don't project lower numbers of right to buys than actually are received.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, in other words, it's hidden within 4 other items to make sure we can't actually pin down how much it actually is.
Have we got any further questions? Councillor Maybury.
Would it be possible for all members to have the actual figure from right to buy receipts, please?
Is that possible to provide that information?
I'm happy to go away outside of the meeting and look at providing you some figures on the precise amount of right to buy receipts.
That would be fine, thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? No more questions? Fine. Well, this is again a recorded vote. So we will take the vote en bloc like last time. And so Jan Robinson will carry out this vote for us.
Thank you, Chair. So same again, councillors, if you could say for, against or abstain. Councillor Arthey. For. Councillor Beer. For. Councillor Busby. For. Councillor Creswell. For. Councillor Davis. For. Councillor Fraser. For. Councillor Granger Howard. For. Councillor Grandon.
For.
Councillor Hardacre. Councillor Hinton. For. Councillor Holt. For. Councillor Hurren. For. Councillor Jameson. For. Councillor Malvesi. For. Councillor Maybury. For. Councillor McCraw. For. Councillor McLaren. For. Councillor Newman. For. Councillor Nunn. For. Councillor Adrian Osborne. For. Councillor Jan Osborne. Councillor Owen, Councillor Parker, and Councillor Ward. Thank you.
So I think that's quite clear. That was a unanimous vote for. We'll now move on to item 11, BC 1937, Joint Capital, Investment and Treasury Management Strategies 2020 to 21. I would like to invite Councillor Ward to introduce paper BC 1937, and to move the recommendations in the report. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the third and last one. I'm pleased to introduce report BC 1937, the Joint Capital Investment and Treasury Management Strategies for 2020 to 2021. This is the second year that we have separate capital investment and treasury management strategy statements and prudential indicators following the new guidance issued by both SITFA and the MHCLG. This report is part of the Council's legal obligation under the Local Government Act 2003 to have regard to both the SITFA Code and the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government's guidance. MHCLG and SITFA are aware that most local authorities are taking a more commercial approach in order to bridge the gap they face as a result of diminishing funding from government. Although they have both stated that they do not seek to prescribe precisely how councils invest, they do have concerns that some councils are taking increasing commercial risks using borrowed money. As a result, this report provides a more extensive strategy so that more of the risks that the codes and guidance highlight are apparent to members. Appendix A is the capital strategy. It summarises the capital expenditure and financing requirements of the full capital programme for both General Fund and HRA, the details of which are in the budget reports that you've just discussed. This sets out capital expenditure and capital investment decisions and the associated risks and rewards, along with how risk is managed for future financial sustainability. Capital expenditure for the next 4 years is shown in Table 1 at paragraph 2.3, and the financing is shown in Table 2, paragraph 2.11. These show that the total capital expenditure planned for 2020 to 2021 is £32.89 million, and most of the general fund expenditure will be funded from borrowing. Appendix A also includes prudential indicators which demonstrate that the investment plans the councils have are affordable, prudent and sustainable, and decisions are made according to good practice. Tables 1, 4, 6, 8 and 9 illustrate the affordability and impact of capital expenditure decisions and set out both councils' overall capital and treasury framework. Borrowing measured against two benchmarks, the capital financing requirement and liability, is shown in tables 6 and 7. Babergh's capital financing requirement is expected to increase by £21.34 million to £177.77 million in 2020 to 2021, and the outstanding debt to increase by £15.25 million to £138.21 million. Statutory guidance says that debt should remain below the CFR, except in the short term. I just need to draw your attention to a couple of minor corrections on page 130, paragraph 7.2. The Babergh number should read 4.44% and the Mid-Suffolk 9.93% to align with the table below. Moving on to the investment strategy, Appendix B details those expenditure items in the capital programme that specifically relate to assets bought or owned by the councils to generate a return, or for regeneration or development of the local area. In this context, investments means non-treasury management activities, which are described separately in Appendix C. There are two types of these investments: service provision, where the councils lend to or buy shares in organisations to provide a service, and for-profit commercial investments which generate a return, such as the council-owned companies Sifco and Gateway 14, but also our directly owned property assets. It explains how each investment contributes to the council's priorities and their security, liquidity and risk. Both councils are continuing to develop their property and commercial portfolios, either by purchasing them directly or through the council's investment companies. Appendix C sets out the council's borrowing requirement in the Treasury Management Strategy, and borrowing and Treasury Management investment strategies are included as well. It also includes a list of approved investment counterparties and limits. Table 1 at paragraph 3.3 is the key table here, showing the breakdown of the capital financing requirement over the next 4 years. Both councils have an increasing CFR due to the capital programme and investments. Appendix D contains the Treasury Management indicators, which we use to measure and manage the council's exposure to Treasury Management risks. Appendix E provides the economic update and interest rate forecasts. And now, following the Bank of England decision to hold interest rates at 0.75% in November, Arlene Close, our Treasury advisors, are now forecasting that it is likely to remain at this level for the foreseeable future. Appendix F describes the current investment and debt portfolio. It shows the position at the 30th of November 2019. The external borrowing at that date for Babergh was £102.54 million, of which £96.54 million was Public Works Loan Board borrowing and £6 million short-term borrowing. Our investments at that date were £13.87 million, which includes the CCLA, Funding Circle, UBS and Schroders. We have continued the policy of withdrawing funds from Funding Circle as loans drop out, and nor have we invested any new money there. Appendix G provides the Treasury Management Policy Statement, which underpins the strategy and sets out both councils' regard to the monitoring of risk and performance. The primary objective of both councils towards investments is security of capital, followed by liquidity and then return. Appendix H is the minimum revenue provision statement, which shows where we put aside the resources to pay debt in later years. Appendix I lists the institutions meeting high credit ratings criteria. And finally, Appendix J is a glossary of terms. I'd like to propose the recommendations in paragraph 3.1 to 3.7 of your report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Holt. We can now open up to questions and debate. Councillor Maybury.
Madam Chairman, it is mentioned, I've lost the page now, it is separately mentioned Babergh Growth Limited. Do those who are directors here have to declare and leave the room?
No, it's a local non-pecuniary interest, I've been told. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor.
With regard to the council offices in Hadley that were agreed for sale and the new company was set up last year, do we have any idea when that work is likely to start on the council offices?
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. Councillor Ward.
Late spring, hopefully.
And do we know will that be when that will be completed at all? Is the target scale for that?
Don't have an estimated completion date or the build-out profile for the Babergh Courts Lane site. I don't know. Emily, do you have any idea of that?
We're still working on the build-out profile for the schemes and looking at how we phase the release of those units in an appropriate fashion. So there will be more information that comes forward in due course.
Any further questions? If there are no further questions, we'll move to a vote on the recommendations in the report. It will not be a recorded vote, it'll be a show of hands. So those in favour? Yes, we're doing it all together. Those in favour, can you show your hands, please? Are there any against? And any abstentions? I see 2 abstentions. Thank you. The vote is carried. We'll now move on to item 12, recommendations and reports from Cabinet Committees. JAC 1910, half-year report on Treasury Management, 2019-20. I would like to invite Councillor Hurren to introduce the report and to move the recommendations in report. Councillor Hurren, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A new voice. This should have come before you, I think, at your last meeting, but due to other things going on, it's a bit late. And there's a certain amount of overlap with what John has just read out and in the previous paper. This is the joint Treasury Management Report covering the position for the first 6 months of the financial year 19 to 20. It provides details of the performance, effects of decisions taken during that period, and confirms compliance with the Council's Treasury Management Policy. The report explains in more detail the factors affecting the strategy and activities, including the regulatory framework, economic conditions, interest rate, and liquidity risks. Interest rates during the year continued at very low levels, and the Bank of England rate remains at 0.75%. Even though leaving the EU was delayed until 31st 20, a key concern is the limited transitionary period following exit date, which will maintain and create additional uncertainty over the next few years. Adding to that, the ongoing dispute about the imposition of tariffs between the US and China continues to contribute to a slowdown in the global economy during 19 and into 20. More specifically for our councils, banking activities undertaken were within the daily bank account limits. Each council has reduced its short-term debt, Babergh by just under £1,989,000 and Mid-Suffolk by £2.67 million. The council investments activities included average returns can be found at Appendix C of the report before you, and that's on page 187, Chairman. Both councils made other investments of £2 million each in a high yield and strategic pool fund, namely the Investec Diversified Income Fund, which I think pays about 3%, but I'm sure that will be clarified in a minute. Investment by both councils in Funding Circle has reduced as unallocated funds have been reclaimed and existing loans repaid. Both councils are compliant, Chairman, with the upper limits for the interest rate exposure. The investment activity undertaken for the half year was done so in priority order of security and liquidity over yield, as prescribed in our strategy. And there's a paragraph that Appendix A 1.2, which is page 179, Chairman. I think that indicates how seriously we take these matters. I would say when I took on this role, I did expect it to be a bit mundane and boring, but not proved to be the case, and the team are absolutely superb. John Snell isn't here tonight, I don't think, but he gets so excited about these figures, it's beginning to rub off me. I'm getting extremely worried. And I must pay tribute to Catherine, Melissa and Sue, who are the driving force behind all this. It's very, very important. I'm very impressed that our money and other people's never seems to stand still, even if it's only here for a week. It's invested somewhere at quite a reasonable rate. And when I say even if it's not our money, if it's money we collect for the police, the county council, it never sits in the bank idle. It's working for us all the time, and that's why, they're not actually gambling and taking punts at night. It goes through a broker, and it is all regulated, but it is very good, and that's what makes it interesting. And the money, ours and every else's, is in really good hand, Chairman. I am quite enjoying this role. If there are questions, Melissa and Catherine are here to answer. They're probably going to be far too hard for me as yet, but between us we will endeavour. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horan. I think you're getting us all excited about the figures too. May I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Ward. We'll now open this up to questions and debate. Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I won't say that I can get excited about it, but one of the things that concerns me, if you like, about it was that the report that's been presented to us is a little historical and doesn't sort of look too much into the near future. We've seen in recent days what's happened to the stock markets around the world in terms of the coronavirus and the effects it's having on the financial markets. We're hearing about the amount of trade from China that is just sitting there doing nothing. Now that's obviously going to have an impact on what happens around the world. Has this been taken into account when looking at our Treasury management, etc.? Because it's obviously going to have quite a considerable impact on the world economy and ours in particular. Because Felixstowe, as we know, is one of the biggest ports in the country handling Chinese imports.
Councillor Horan, is this one for Catherine Steele? Or would you like to take it?
Myself, not so much of the details. This is something we will be dealing with, obviously. It is worrying times. That's what we're here for, and we will handle it competently. But with other things that have gone on last year, I agree it's not good news, and we should all be concerned. There are no facts and figures as yet, but we will be watching it.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? If there are no further questions or comments, we'll take a vote on the recommendations in the report. All those in favour of the recommendations in the report? That's carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 13, BC 1938. Proposed changes to council meeting dates 2020-21. I would like to invite Councillor Ward to introduce paper BC 1938 and to move the recommendation in the report. Thank you, Councillor Ward.
Thank you. This report just highlights a few changes to scheduled council meeting dates throughout the year and into next year, just to streamline and make fluent the way that we work and operate in terms of having council meetings. There are only 2 or 3 that have changed, but you'll see that we're going to have meetings essentially every 2 months throughout the year, but with 1 or 2 exceptions. There'll be a meeting that's put in obviously for the budget in February, if there's any need for any further meetings that need to be slotted in, if an agenda does require that, then obviously we will, but this is based around the likely workload and the likely agenda profile throughout the year. So consequently, I propose the recommendation that we change the meeting schedule here and make the minor changes that are highlighted in the table you've got at 3.1 of the report. Thank you.
Can I have a seconder? Councillor Beer. Can I invite you to questions and debate? Any questions or debate, please? Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, we seem to be opting for a reduction in the number of meetings for council, which is the one time when ordinary councillors can get involved in what is happening at Cabinet and everywhere else within the council. And we've already seen the problems that effectively happened with overview and scrutiny because of the delay or the freezing of council business in the autumn because of the impact that we were going to have on the national elections, which struck me as being a little bit strange because they don't freeze what's happening in Parliament when we have our local council elections or county council elections, so, and they're more likely to have an impact on our results than we are on them. But that's beside the point. We were told to do it. We were good little boys and girls and did it. But this is a reduction in the number of meetings of full council and our ability to tell the public and to cross-examine on behalf of the public. And I don't think that it is compliant with our open and transparent clauses within our constitution and within our corporate strategies.
Thank you, Councillor Hinton. Councillor Ward.
It's only a reduction of 2, and it's cognizant of the fact that we have cancelled council meetings in the past, and this will make sure that we've got a regular set of meetings throughout the year. But when you said it's the only time that members get to to scrutinise business. That's not actually true. You're all very welcome to attend Cabinet meetings and also meetings of the Joint Overview and Scrutiny and Joint Audit and Standards Committees.
Councillor McCraw.
Thank you, Chair. I must confess I was a little bit taken aback the same way as John Hinton was. I can't support this. Not because I don't see the practicalities of it. There may well be very good practical reasons, but I don't think it sends a very good message. We have 8 meetings a year, and yes, there have been occasions where we need, for lack of items to put on the agenda, we've had cancellations of those meetings. Fine, let that be so if that is the case. But I would have said cancelling in advance before we even know what might or might not be, even with we're anticipating. So reducing the number of opportunities for ourselves, for members of the public to ask questions of Council and Cabinet, I think is probably a retrograde step. I couldn't support it. I think it's a democratic deficit, and I will never support one of those. I appreciate this might cause some inconveniences. There may well be meetings that could be cancelled amongst the Council's agenda. Some discussion took place in my group about possibilities of certain briefings that were fundamentally just repetitions of the same thing. But I don't believe that what we are voted, or what we are elected to do, what people think is the primary function of a councillor going to the main council meetings, should just be casually got rid of. As I say, if these meetings do need to be changed, if we can stick to the current schedule, and then we have to cancel, fine. But there has to be a reason given why that is the case. The other thing is that if we just cancel now, we lose the bookings for the rooms, and we all know how difficult it is to get bookings, and coming up with a meeting at the last minute and then trying to get the council chamber might not always be possible. So I won't be supporting. That's been my experience elsewhere. And anyway, I won't be supporting this, and I think members should think very hard before agreeing to something that has that effect.
Councillor Davis. Sorry, Councillor Ward, did you want to reply?
Yeah, I did mention earlier that members have the opportunity to come to Cabinet meetings and ask questions, and also the other committee meetings. And it is the fact that democracy doesn't just happen in this chamber. There are the other committees through which members can come and can ask questions and can scrutinise the work that goes on.
Councillor Davis. Okay, Councillor McCraw.
All I would say to the chair, the leader of the council, is that these are our showpieces, or should be. Budget being a very good example. These are the moments where people expect to be following us, and they don't really generally follow committee meetings or cabinet meetings.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions, but I just want to make a point first of all. Obviously, we do live stream now, so members of the public can watch us on here, and same with the Cabinet, same with the Planning Committee, so they can use that. And as you can see by the amount of the public here tonight to look at the budget, probably they're all at home watching it on TV. My 2 questions are this. In the report, it says that A, there's no financial implications, and B, there's no environmental implications. But surely both of those, it would save money if we didn't have these meetings, and also environmentally, and we have made a pledge to be more environmental friendly. It would save however many people have turned up in their cars today. Some are already here all day, but those that haven't, they've made that journey. So I think in the report possibly lacks the detail in both the finance and the environmental impacts.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Any other questions? Councillor Hurren.
I must admit I'm concerned about this. I think I would rather be in a position where you have one booked and cancel it if you don't need it than have to scrab around to find one. Also, I think we have set processes here, don't we? And things tend to go to committee, maybe to cabinet, and then come to full council. And I do think it concentrates the mind, possibly of officers and councillors. We've got a deadline coming up. We need to get it to that full council meeting. If it's not there, I'm not saying that everybody goes to sleep for a month, but I think it does take away the urgency of what we're used to, and I think that's my main point. I'm uneasy about it. I would rather put one in and then take it out if we don't need it, than not have it there. I think while it's there, it's something to aim at, and we are in danger of losing it. Thank you.
Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got some sympathy actually with what some of my colleagues are saying, but I don't know if I've missed something, but the detail is very scant. Why? What is the benefit of cutting these meetings, or the number of meetings?
Councillor Ward.
Well, it's just purely based on the anticipated workload, given what we've experienced over the past couple of years, and to be able to smooth that out over the year.
Sorry, Councillor Ward, I'm still a little bit confused. So are we anticipating the workload going down or anticipating the workload going up?
Workload's staying the same, and given the fact that we have council meetings in the past because of lack of sufficient items for the agenda, and this is to ensure that we will have full and regular meetings every 2 months, with 1 or 2 extras filled in between.
Councillor Malvesi.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I support it because, from an environmental perspective, look at the amount of paper around here. That would be reduced. The number of car journeys be reduced. I think we should seriously consider it. We made a pledge. We have to be the ones to show the way to reduce waste. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maybury.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is probably to the monitoring officer. If the council meetings are moved to 1 every 2 months, and they happen to fall on, from my experience, a work day, does this mean that the 6-month rule will not come into effect?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The 6-month rule, in terms of having to attend a council meeting at least once every 6 months, will always stand. It's in legislation, unless the councillor has been granted a dispensation from attending by the council, and there are set reasons why that might be acceptable. While I've got the floor, if I may, Chairman, if I can offer some reassurance to the council, this programme of dates hasn't just been arrived at willy-nilly. What we've done is we've considered the scheduled business of the council, so items that regularly come up year on year, and we've also anticipated our forward programme of work. And this, the months that we've chosen to diarise these meetings make the most logical sense in terms of when those items of business come forward. There is always the opportunity to convene additional meetings as and when required, but I do think that this programme will adequately cover the council's business over the next municipal year, particularly given that this council has recently reviewed many of its key major strategies, which is some of the workload that has come through this council meeting in the past year. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Creswell.
My concern is this meeting obviously is at an evening time. Mr Ward said go to other meetings, but quite a lot of them happen to be in the daytime. So I think you want nearly a full attendance of all your councillors on a full meeting, and I think cutting down the meetings might not be a good thing.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Busby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, if we're going to cancel some of these meetings, or any meetings, I'll scrap the joint cabinet meetings or the cabinet briefing, then we won't have to deal with these things 4 times, which is what we're doing at the moment, it appears. It's very good, it's very easy for the Cabinet to be on top of things because we meet fairly regularly, probably too regularly. But if you're a regular councillor, you're not necessarily aware of what's going on. And we did a constitutional review not long ago, which was the outcome was to tip the balance back in towards council meetings rather than Cabinet making decisions. And this seems to be going against that. I think the Cabinet meetings are important. In fact, I'd say they were crucial. I think that what we could do is to look at the kind of items that we deal with in the Cabinet meetings. I think there should be more open debates before decisions are made, perhaps. So it's a combination of a debate and a council meeting. It doesn't have to be just here to rubber stamp decisions, which is what this lot was. But we could make much better use of having all councillors here to get their views from across the district on issues that are affecting us.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. Councillor McCraw.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, I'd just like to add that committees meet at varying times. Planning meets approximately every 2 weeks, or can do, although occasionally there isn't not enough on their agenda, in which case they cancel. But it's understood that it will meet every 2 weeks and the programme is drawn up accordingly. Okay, that's a standard thing. Audit might meet, what, 3 times, 4 times a year? Well, once a quarter? Yeah. Okay, and I've just come from a meeting today where we meet once every 6 months because it's a specific area of scrutiny. Scrutiny is meeting every month. And as I pointed out earlier, I'm not saying, poor us. I'm saying that, like members of the Cabinet, members of scrutiny get a much better idea of what's going on in council. And we are talking about all members of the council. Those members, as has been pointed out, can't attend in the daytimes. Those members who can only be here at evenings. And I do still think that the democratic deficit. So I'd ask the leader of the council to reconsider this motion and perhaps just to think about whether those dates and whether a different approach might be better for the good of the council.
Councillor Ward.
Just to clarify, the Cabinet meets alternately during the day and during the evening, so we're not solely a daytime committee. In terms of the ability or the subject matter that comes before council as opposed to comes before Cabinet, that's a matter for the Constitution, and there's certain things that are reserved for Cabinet and other matters that are reserved for council, and we're not in a position to change that just by a matter of decree. It's something that has to be agreed as a constitutional change. But I think if we didn't make this change now, as the monitoring officer has said, this is based on an understanding of the work schedule and work profile throughout the year. We'll end up where we are now, and we'll be cancelling meetings, and we'll still be at the same number of meetings and the same frequency that we're proposing in this revised schedule here. It's just a matter of regularising what effectively happens as a matter of course.
Councillor Hinton.
Interesting what Councillor Ward has said. How can you regularise something when it's on a different day of the week every single time you have a meeting? We're talking about the next scheduled meeting, page 6 of your papers, 20th of April, Monday. Normally we have council meetings on a Tuesday, but we didn't because Suffolk County Council Cabinet threw us out so that they could discuss their budget. So we have to move it to Wednesday. If we're going to regularise something, let's regularise it. And just to point on the environmental issue, if all the councillors have to come into Cabinet so they can keep up to date with what's going on, that's going to increase the number of car journeys, not reduce them.
Councillor Ward.
We're on YouTube.
Councillor Maybury.
If I can come back onto that one, but if it's on YouTube, then is it possible then for members to come into Skype and ask questions that way? Because at the moment it isn't. The Cabinet is only for those people who are present can ask questions.
Councillor Ward.
I think we can look into that. Technically, it should be feasible. It's just a matter of the the practicalities of arranging that. But I'd be open to that as an option.
I'm glad to be of use.
Councillor Hurren.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Not wanting the last word, but according to what some other people said, I think I might say, what price democracy? And I'm amazed how many people do watch us live or recorded online. I have friends in Boxford who know what I say the following morning because they sit up in bed and listen to what we've all said. We almost have a groupie following, but if there's no meeting, I feel there will be a deficit in democracy in this. I really do feel that. And you can make all the arguments about bits of paper. If we're not seen to do the job properly and get in a muddle, then we'll be burning more rubber and paper to get ourselves out of it. So let's stay as we are. And then if we have no business, well, we can always declare it and cancel the meeting. And I think my point I made before, but concentrating the mind on a schedule is a very valid one as well, Chairman. Thank you. I will shut up now.
Councillor Davis.
Yeah, if it's of help, a couple of us councillors did a live stream with one of the, a few of the schools coming in together, and they emailed their questions and comments live. So I think whether it's Skype or whether it's an email facility through YouTube, we've got the technology. We should be using it. And you're right, we've got laptops with ModGov. Yes, we've got some late papers, but all that paper being printed out, for example. So there are ways of improving it, but councillors have to engage, have to move with the times.
Councillor Busby.
The June meeting that's suggested to be removed, could I suggest that we have a climate change debate on that so that the good councillor over there could bring us up to date with the progress to date on it, since it's such an important topic for us? I think it's be about time for us then to engage.
Councillor Malvesi, did you want to come back on that?
No pressure at all, thank you, Councillor. We were due to meet on the 10th of March, that date has been postponed. It has been put back later because, as I said earlier to Councillor Hinton, we're waiting for what's known as a baseline report from Groundworks, and once we have that data in, then we can write our report and present it to Council, and we know in April. We intend to do it in April. Yes. So unless somebody else knows of any differences, but that is when we're looking to present it, I think.
My concern with that is it gets lost in an agenda which has got 15 items on it, and by the time we get round to discussing it, we're all half dead. It deserves to be a full council discussion, in my view. It doesn't have to be a council meeting, but it's a good opportunity to do it.
I thoroughly agree with you. It covers energy, it covers vehicles, it covers trees, verges, waste collection, waste disposal. So the number of subjects and the ramifications of this climate change report is huge. It's really big. So I would welcome a full debate on it, and I look forward to it when it comes, when we get the report ready.
Members, can I suggest that we talk about the content of any future meetings outside this meeting, because we're really here to discuss how many meetings and whether we're going to cancel or whatever future meetings, rather than discussing the content of such meetings. So if we could please keep it to the advantages or disadvantages of the proposed timetable, please. Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Arthey.
Just one that's only just occurred to me, really, and it's a procedural issue, because I see that this was agreed, the original timetable was agreed on the 24th of September 2019. if this is a council decision, we can't actually change that until March the 24th, can we? The 6-month rule.
Our monitoring officer will tell us.
Thank you, Chairman. It's always good to have a procedural question to answer. You're not rescinding a decision, you're not going overturning a decision that you've previously made, you're making an alteration to a schedule of dates that's previously been agreed, so that would be allowed without breaching the 6-month rule. Thank you.
Councillor Hinton.
Chairman, yeah, accepting what the monitoring officer has said, but surely if we are reducing the number of meetings, we are overturning part of that decision. So we're picking and choosing with words and technicalities over something that really is a fundamental part of democracy.
Chairman, I've given my advice on the procedural points. I would suggest that the Council consider now moving to a vote on the matter. However, what I would say is if you vote against this new proposed schedule, you'll revert to what was previously agreed. There are some minor alterations of dates that are in months where you previously had council meetings, so you might want to consider those. I don't know whether an amendment might be appropriate in that regard.
Those could always be changed as they had been previously because of need, and I don't think there's any difference. So I still think a vote for or against is just the same. I mean, you know, their points are unchanged. If you need to change the dates of the agenda as it was, you can do so. You never had that, didn't have that option.
So I think we're ready now to move to a vote. Can we take a vote for the proposed new schedule? Those for the proposed new schedule, please show your hands.
Are you voting?
I won't until unless it's those against? Any abstentions? Right, it's carried.
Madam Chairman, on a point of order, can we have the figures? Because to the public watching back home, they've no idea. Can you tell us the number of votes?
Can you tell us the numbers, please? 1310, I've been told. I didn't vote. So we'll move on now to item 14, councillor appointments. I'd like to invite Councillor Ward to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chairman. This is just one very small change to the Planning Committee, the Conservative members of the Planning Committee. I'd like to replace Councillor Zach Norman with Councillor Mary McLaren.
And are there any more changes in any other committees? Thank you. Can we take a vote on this, please? Oh, sorry, I need a seconder. Councillor Beer, thank you. Yes, Councillor Hinton.
Can we assume that this change is due to the fact that Zach Norman can't get here during working hours? And therefore the increase or the reduction of meetings is going to make things difficult?
It's actually irrelevant. That's not part of what we're here to discuss today. Thank you. So we'll now take a vote. All those in favour, please. That's carried. Thank you. So we've reached the end of today's meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for some lively debate. I'd like you all to note that the next meeting, as someone observed earlier, is Monday, the 20th of April, at 5:30 p.m. So thank you very much for a lively evening this evening, and good night. It's now 7:24. I close the meeting.